new society of harmony based on sort of the 150 million people who have become capitalists now, who are now the new vanguard of the revolution. And the belief is that there would be a sort of trickle-down effect if science could develop this philosophy of harmony, and the chief impediment to it was superstition. So they have a very similar program. It's not one I would buy into, but there is a third way, a third moral philosophy that could follow very well the precepts you offer. So again, the question is, do you think that the original premises, the moral premises, can be decided by scientific debate?
Well, I think science construed in a larger sense. I mean, there's something called rationality that we distinguish from irrationality. So history is a part of that. I mean, the belief that the Japanese bombed us at Pearl Harbor is a factual belief. And anyone who's going to argue that the people from Borneo did it has a burden to meet. Now, that's not science. I mean, it's history. But this is construing science in that larger sense, that larger footprint of certainty scaling with the evidence. I think, yeah, science is the best we've got. And I think, I mean, there are consequentialist problems, I mean, one of which has been raised at this meeting. I forgot who did it. But yeah, who among us wants to live in a society where you go to the doctor for a checkup and he realizes that he's got 5 people who need organs, and they just, vivisect you, take your organs, and 5 people are better off. This is I think we can use various rational heuristics to discover that we don't want to live in that society, even though it's hard to do the moral arithmetic and say the integrity of one person's life has to trump 5 people who need their organs. I mean, this is whether you use a Rawlsian veil of ignorance. We can talk about this and converge, and we're not going to wind up with very likely what the Chinese have in mind at the moment. Also, I just want to say to you, Scott, there's a massive gulf between how you and I think about these issues, particularly the question of Islam. And I don't want my not dealing with that in this talk to signal that I haven't recognized this gulf, or that I don't think others should recognize it. I mean, I think your talk, I thought I had a good theory of mind. I don't know what you are doing with yours in your talk on Islam. And I mean, this should be left for another day, perhaps. But I would grant you almost everything you said in your talk about Islam. I mean, 90% of what you said is true, and yet the general message you draw from it, I think, is utterly false. And you have a style of drawing that message, which is, somewhat confabulatory in my mind. I mean, you have a blizzard of detail, much of which is orthogonal to the question at hand, and you basically delivered this idea that soccer and friendship among men is the problem. It explains suicide bombing better than the explicit doctrines of jihadism and martyrdom and Muslim eschatology. And I think it's irresponsible. And I think you owe it to yourself and you owe it to us to debate someone who can debate you on this subject. I would be happy to debate you on the subject, but the problem that, let me just recognize here, is that there's so much white guilt in every audience you're likely to talk to that it's not going to take someone like me. It's going to take someone like Ayaan Hirsi Ali, or someone who got out of Islam, someone who has been punished by Islam, who knows how totalitarian it is, who feels the relief of modernity and secular politics, and who can say to you, you are wrong about Islam, you are wrong about the role that Muslim ideology is playing, and you owe it to yourself to have that conversation publicly with someone who can do that.
All right. Well, hang on.
Yeah.
You actually want to reply to that?
And you can't reply.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think such a public debate would be proper and good, but it would have to be with someone who knows what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Has the slightest notion of what's going on out there, and that I haven't seen here.
Okay. Well, I'll take that, Philip. But
thank you. All right.
So,
Whoa, Austin. So we'll just take Austin Dacey's point, and then we have to move on to Dan Smale.
Austin Dacey with the Center for Inquiry. It's always
pleasure to hear from a fellow non-astronomer.
Astrologer, although non-astronomer also. Yeah.
Non-astronomer.
I'm equally not an astronomer, unfortunately.
An A astrologer.
Now, there's an assumption that is at work oftentimes in discussions like these. I've heard it at work this week. It's a tempting assumption, but I think it's one you wish to avoid. I wanted to get your comment, please. The assumption is to think that the social space vacated by the collapse of religion, should it collapse, must be filled in by one single new institution or movement,
right,
which will fulfill all the roles formerly performed by religion. This is a mistake because, as we can see, this is not the way that the secularization of Europe proceeded, for example. It wasn't as though, you know, the Danes stopped going to church and then started going to some new place where they got all these things. They started going to many places. They went to universities, they went to cafes, they went to psychotherapists, they went to the movies. To make this point more credible, we can give it a name. It's a fallacy. Call it the fallacy of decomposition. As the mansion of religion decomposes, no new single mansion springs up to take its place, but instead a patchwork, a variegated garden. And I wanted to ask whether you thought that science was the new monoculture that rises up in the place of the estate of religion, or whether it was just one part of that garden, and what else is in that garden? Is there a place for philosophy, for literature, for poetry, for laughter?
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great point, and clearly there's not this narrow substitution. You know, it's not like you get rid of the belief in Santa Claus and then you get a new belief that's doing exactly what the belief in Santa Claus did for you. And science, I think, as you would agree, is only part of that, of what rushes in to fill the void. And I think we have to recognize that it already has done this on almost every other question, except for questions of morality, meaning, and spiritual experience. You know, it's certainly done it on medicine. I mean, you look at we did come from a time where the good doctors of the church could diagnose epilepsy. You know, they diagnosed it as demonic possession. The cure for which is exorcism. Now, occasionally you find some group of misguided people who are performing exorcisms on their children and not taking them to neurologists. But neurology has stolen that ground from under religion's feet. And science has done this on a host of other questions, but it's not only science. I mean, it's art. I think we do. I mean, we are handicapped because we don't have a vocabulary in science, and many scientists are not disposed to explore the sacred experience. And I think there is a room for the concept of the sacred. And I think I applaud Stuart Kauffman for wanting to reinvent the sacred. I don't happen to agree with just renaming the universe as God and then changing faith to being our admission that we can't account for all the variables in phase space. I don't think that's the way to do it. I think it's going to be sniffed out by religious people very quickly as being somewhat disingenuous. But we do need to recognize that people have profound experiences that can be hard-won. You know, I mean, someone who goes into a cave for a year and practices meditation or prays to Jesus has an experience that most of us don't have most of the time, and perhaps not all of us are capable of having because we don't have the right genes or the right neurology. And yet it makes it no less interesting, and it makes it no less relevant to our discourse about human happiness. So whether that's a contemplative science that emerges, or whether that's some other domain, I don't know. But the thing that I do know is that we should punish people rhetorically whenever they claim to know things they clearly don't know, and we do that effortlessly in every other conversation except on the subject of God. So.
All right, thanks, Sam.
Thank you.
Let's move on. So actually, on your point, Austin, one of the things that we're trying to do here, obviously, is to recognize that point, and that's why I have some people who are working in literature. Robert's demonstration yesterday of some of the delights of music was supposed to be along those lines. But and I also noticed that after the fires, that although most of the newspapers had front-page stories about people flocking to churches, which is quite appropriate because that's where they could get community stuff and so on. I didn't see many stories about the huge increase in email at places like the Salk Institute of people who didn't even know each other offering places to go and stay. So I think that those kind of communities also exist in other domains of society.